Welcome to the next level. It's time to do a very anticipated video, and there's one person who I know is super excited for this.
Let's make this absolutely clear. This is another rug pull like last year where you promised to review Sonic 2, then you took me to the vet.
Prower, the ringworm was near fatal. What was I supposed to do?
I don't know. Take me to a doctor. What do you think I am, a pet dog?
Well, you are my bitch.
Okay, that was good. But just do the video.
Of course, buddy. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was released in 2022, a sequel to the critically acclaimed Sonic the Hedgehog from 2020. The first movie's development is notoriously infamous for—
Wait, what is this?
It's Sonic 2, dude.
You know what you're doing. Do it for real this time.
Alright, you got me. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was released in 1992.
Good.
For the Sega Game Gear and Master System.
JARTY.
Quit teasing. It means so much to him, no matter how dorky it is.
Alright. We'll do it for real this time. This one's for you, bud. The year is 1991, and the impossible has been made quite possible. The Super Nintendo had actually sold less units than expected for the follow-up to the incredibly successful NES, and Sega had sold more Genesis and Mega Drive consoles in 1991 than the previous 2 years combined, with Sega's console being marked down and cheaper than Nintendo's own machine, with a library of both existing hits and upcoming gems that look just about as good as anything on Nintendo's console. It actually convinced people looking forward to the brand new Nintendo machine to just buy Sega's console instead. Something that also didn't help Nintendo's side was the relatively new concept of upgrading hardware. For a lot of parents, shelling out more money for a brand new Nintendo when you had just bought your kids a Nintendo a year or two ago was a pretty hard pill to swallow.
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to explain to him how people market things to make you spend more money.
You can't expect the average boomer parent of the 90s to see differences in color unless it's the person who messes up their drive-thru order at McDonald's.
That's not to say Nintendo wasn't seeing success, though. Selling millions of a thing in a year and being disappointed by it is like saying,
I made $1 million, but I wanted to make $1,000,001. This fucking economy!
It's just showing that Sega was actually competing with Nintendo, and all of the success was thanks to the brand new Genesis pack-in title.
You mean Altered Beast was replaced?
Sonic the Hedgehog was the answer to Mario that Sega desperately needed. It was bright, colorful, and most importantly, despite what YouTubers will try to tell you, fun. The pack-in title for the Super Nintendo, the highly anticipated Super Mario World, was wonderful, but it was a safe sequel and was clearly not taking full advantage of the Super Nintendo hardware. As great as Super Mario World is, it doesn't look nearly as impressive as Sonic 1. Sega did the impossible and took Nintendo down a peg. And they were about to lose everything they had achieved. Yuji Naka had just spent the last few years programming hit after hit for Sega, like the highly successful RPG Phantasy Star for the Master System, its sequel for the Genesis, the impressive port of Ghouls and Ghosts, and of course, the new mascot. The reason Sega was able to turn things around in the North American market had left the company shortly after the release of Sonic 1. Despite all of this success, the ever-intelligent Japanese branch of Sega had felt that the game took too long to develop and held Naka responsible for that.
Sounds like the average corporate decision to me. You did a good job making us money, but can't you do better?
It's not that Sonic couldn't exist without Yuji Naka, but I think part of it may have had to do with the fact that the Japanese part of Sega was not yet willing to admit Sonic was a success. While highly successful in the Americas and Europe, Sonic just wasn't doing much to change things for Sega in Japan.
Sonic wasn't successful in Japan, so they just decided to make the game at Sega Technical Institute.
Not exactly. The Sega Technical Institute was formed in 1991. 1991, in the hope that young and aspiring game developers in the United States could be trained by Japanese game developers that were hoping to get away from the Japanese management and get more advantages and better pay. The man put in charge of the new studio was Mark Cerny, who is best known today for his work at PlayStation, but was already well known for his work at Atari and Sega. In fact, the level designer of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, a man known as Hirokazu Yashihara, was already supposed to make the move to the Sega Technical Institute, but was delayed and decided to help Naka and Oshima with Sonic. When Cerny found out that Naka had left Sega, he got a hold of him, knowing Naka personally, and convinced him to come to the United States to work with him at the new studio. They tried to get Oshima to come too, but apparently Sega of Japan prevented that from happening. Still, with 2 of the 3 main players in the development of the first Sonic, Cerny was sure that they would be handed the responsibility of developing Sega's most important sequel.
They didn't get it, did they?
Mark Cerny hasn't talked too much about his time working at Sega, but you can hear the frustration in his interview quote here over a decade after the game came out originally.
I had managed to reunite 2 of the 3 key Sonic team members at my Sega Technical Institute. They were ready to start work on their next project, and so I asked marketing the obvious question: would you like another Sonic? Bizarrely, the response was, and again, I kid you not, no. It's much too soon. So we found another game to make, and in November, as we were getting started, marketing came back and said, oops, we do need that game, and we need it now. So the team lost 2 months out of an 11-month schedule. Mark Cerny, programmer for Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Eventually, they realized what a mistake they'd made and greenlit development on the game proper. One of the first things that had to be cut, and there was a lot, was the entire concept of Sonic chasing Eggman through time and space. Lots of ideas and concepts for levels did end up in the final Sonic the Hedgehog 2, like Chemical Plant and Hilltop, while others, like the Ocean Wind Zone, were either cut then and there or forgotten about entirely. They barely had time to finish the 11 zones that made it into the final game, and one of the biggest losses, in my opinion, was the removal of the underground Hidden Palace zone, one of the first zones worked on, but abandoned early on in development to focus on other parts of the game, with the intent to come back to it, which never happened. Another decision made early on was that Sonic would have to have a sidekick, a Luigi to Sonic's Mario, and justification for the brand new 2-player mode. One of the conditions Naka had to make the sequel was to implement a 2-player mode in the game, something he deeply regretted missing the first time around. Like when Sonic was in the competition to become Sega's mascot, they held an eternal competition to design a second player. Much less is known about candidates for this competition than the first, but we do have one design from future Spyro the Dragon developer Craig Stitt. This turtle with a rocket-powered shell would help Sonic by floating him across massive gaps, but he would need his help to get moving as well as to get back up. But I think everybody knows the winner of this competition. Yasushi Yamaguchi, who I will from now on refer to by his nickname Judy Totoya, because that is way easier to say, and lead artist, taking up Oshima's role from the first game, won with his design, Miles Prower, a young fox that would idolize Sonic and could even almost keep up with him with his twin tails, using them to fly by spinning them like helicopter blades. But the rest of the team wasn't as happy with the name. Totoya was not happy with the suggested alternative, Tails, which obviously matched Sonic's name much better. The compromise was made where Tails would be the character's nickname, and Miles Prower his legitimate name. The game, of course, needed music. Masato Nakamura was brought back to do the second game's soundtrack. He went hard this time, and even surprised the developers by turning the new ending theme in the game into a track on their new album, Sweet Dream Na Us, or Sweet 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 Japan.
And we'll thank you for it by firing you when we do Sonic 3!
Yeah, that really came back and bit them in the ass, didn't it? There were 2 very different cultures working on this important game. The experienced Japanese side of STI, as well as the inexperienced American side. And usually, if something was cut, it would be the American stuff. Conflicts arose because of this, and Craig Stitt had this to say.
My only complaint was that if art had to get cut out, it always seemed to be the Americans on the team whose art got cut. Sometimes this was because the art wasn't working, but on other occasions, I don't believe this was the case, such as with Hidden Palace, although I was never happy with the far background.
As if pressure wasn't high enough on the developers, Sega of America had come up with the idea to launch the game like a film and give it a worldwide release date of November 24th of 1992, 30 years ago, and have the day go down in history as Sonic Tuesday. The game was shown off a lot in early development, perhaps more so than any other game in history up until that point. We'll double back into why that's important later, but for now I want to explain that this was completely unprecedented for a video game release in 1992, and Sega had to do a lot to make it happen. This would also mean that the developers of the game could not get any extra time whatsoever. Extra support was actually even sent out from Japan just to help the team make the insane deadline and get the game gold just in time. Despite all of the odds, it was done and the game made the release date and was released to huge fanfare 30 years ago.
Now, when you buy the Sega Genesis that comes with Sonic 1, you'll get Sonic 2 absolutely free. Sonic 2 handles stubborn stains, embarrassing bald spots, no problem. It even slices and dices, makes thousands of
Oh my god.
Look, I know everybody's gonna look at me for this, but I didn't do it this time.
Yeah, it was me. He ate my pasta. I can't be the good guy all the time.
Oh, for the love of... Change it. It's like a toddler. After the events of Sonic CD, Sonic decides on a whim to take his biplane, the Tornado, which up to this point has never been mentioned before. Where did he get it?
He got it from the plane store, stupid!
It's never really explained, but it is explained that Sonic decided, for no real reason, to land on the West Side Island, where, according to myth, the island was once home to a powerful race that used mysterious stones to gain power. This race displeased the gods and was therefore stripped of these legendary stones. A few days after landing on the island, Sonic happened to notice a new face following him around. Miles Tails Prower, a fox with twin tails, hence the nickname. Being bullied a lot for his second tail, Sonic gave him someone to look up to, and he would follow Sonic around. Sonic eventually accepts this. One day, after finding Sonic sleeping next to the plane, Tails' excitement for the plane is cut short by an explosion. A fire is seen over the distance, and Sonic instantly can guess what's going on. Dr. Eggman was back, and he had followed Sonic here, and found out the island was the true home of the Chaos Emeralds. The 6 from Sonic 1 that had returned home after the events of the game, as well as the recently discovered 7th. This time, Eggman had built his ultimate weapon, the Death Egg.
It turns out that Eggman's true evil genius was being a plagiarist this entire time.
Sonic sets off to beat Eggman again, with Tails coming along for the adventure. I'm gonna keep this short since I covered the basics back in the Sonic 1 video. I just want to keep it to the completely new mechanics. But to also clarify, this video is built off 2 main different versions of the game. The original Sega Genesis version, as well as the Retro Engine version built by Christian Whitehead originally for mobile in 2013 and ported to console for the Sonic Origins release in 2022. Like all of the other Retro Engine versions, it is easily the definitive official release to play. But for starters, you can pick to play as Sonic or Tails. Although for the most part, both are identical to play as unless you happen to be a speedrunner, or Tails having a smaller hitbox can come into play occasionally. Other than that, there are two player type modes. Normally when you start the game, Sonic will always be joined by Tails, who normally just tries to follow Sonic and his inputs a second or so after. This leads to Tails getting left in the dust, and will be seen flying back on screen. In the original version, Tails cannot manually fly, but obviously this was added in the Retro Engine version. Here's where a second player can come in. Using a second controller, the second player can control Tails. On one hand, this can be helpful for bosses, since Tails is invincible and will not lose rings or lives. On the other hand though, with Sonic always off-screening Tails, with him being the focus of the camera, it's really hard for a second player to feel like they're actually contributing to the game a good chunk of the time. The second player can also control Tails in the special stages, but unless you both are completely synchronized, I find this to be more of a burden. There's also a more traditional 2-player mode, where 2 players can race through select zones using items to hinder each other. It can be a fun distraction, although I don't recommend doing the special stage competition, since it basically turns into leapfrog. Of course, the most important new mechanic is the spin dash. By pressing down and the jump button repeatedly, Sonic and Tails can charge a spin and release to get instant speed. This is an iconic move that many feel should have been in the first Sonic the Hedgehog, but there is a minority that feels like the spin dash took away from Sonic 1's more momentum-based platforming, since the spin dash is in some ways instant gratification.
Nobody gives a care about the fate of labor as long as they can get their instant gratification.
Oh, and for the most part, zones now only have 2 acts instead of 3, which makes sense since A, there's almost double the amount of stages in this game compared to the first, and B, because they're much bigger than the acts in the original game. But honestly, that's pretty much it. The game's mechanics mostly just improve on what worked in the first Sonic and expand on that.
JARTY, I can't help but notice you didn't really touch on the 2-player mode in this video.
Yeah, JARTY, while you explain the obvious faux pas, I'm gonna take a drink from this comedically large glass of soda.
Well, Sonic 2's multiplayer is a lot like Prower's Sex Slave.
Good thing I didn't take a drink yet.
It's funny how much attention the 2-player mode got in marketing for this game, considering how one-sided it is. It's only good for one of the players, like...
Oh, I get it. Like Prower's...
Hey!
So remember, ladies, Sex or Sonic 2 multiplayer, no matter what you play with Prower, you'll end up wanting more.
It's 2-player, you know, so you get to play with more than just yourself.
Enough.
Long into the development process, this zone was called Green Hill Zone, and that makes a lot of sense. The two are extremely similar. That's not to say, though, that the Emerald Hill Zone doesn't have anything to make it unique.
Oh, buzzers. Allegedly, they're more efficient than buzz bombers thanks to their thermal detonation gun, but they're not at all harder to defeat. So you kinda dropped the ball there, Ivo. I really like the slightly more complex mechanical detail, like on the masher, but that kinda ends up interfering with the robot's toyetic qualities that I like so much in Sonic 1. The coconuts are just right, and although their massive nuts make me wish for the insta-shield, they're really cute and charming. Oh, there also was a cut snail badnik called Snail, which works kind of like a motobug. I say good riddance, since it was replaced by Nutboy.
The new corkscrew loops are a fun alternative to the returning loop-de-loops from the previous game. Another reason the zone's name works so well is with the new method of getting to the special stage. You still need 50 rings like before, but by bringing them to a non-activated checkpoint, the recently renamed Star Posts, a circle of stars will appear, being your portal into the brand new special stage. Since there are exactly 8 Star Posts in Emerald Hill, I'd double check that, it is possible to get, but if you're new to Sonic, you have a better chance of talking Motzi out of a free dinner. Here it is, the most iconic special stage in the entire series. That 3D pre-rendered half-pipe blew minds in '92, and now in 2022, it just blows chunks. Here, Sonic and Tails try to gather enough rings before a checkpoint gate. On the 3rd checkpoint, with enough rings, you get a Chaos Emerald. Sounds easy enough, but a few things hold us back. For starters, bombs are scattered everywhere and can take a chunk of rings for every casualty. This, combined with the nature of the stage being pre-rendered so you already have less time to react to them, that should clue you in to why these can be annoying. But we haven't even talked about Tails yet. Poor Tails. I swear they made him a genius later on just to make fun of the poor fox. But just like the normal game, he follows your inputs with a tiny delay added. He can also pick up extra rings you miss, allowing him to be a second hitbox. But unlike the normal game, Tails has his own ring count and can even lose rings. This is the most aggravating part of these special stages, but hold on, we aren't done yet. If you happen to mess up and get hit yourself, you can end up behind Tails, and it's all over if you can't find a way to trick the AI into letting you back in front. The reason is simple. If the AI character who is following your inputs a second late and collecting the majority of the rings, it doesn't take a detective to figure out you're screwed. It's not like you can fix it by jumping, because Tails will jump also, getting back ahead of you. You can turn Tails off, and that does reduce the required ring amounts a little bit, but I like Tails. This is entirely a hindrance and made this way to add more to the 2-player mode. Since if there was only one ring count and Tails couldn't lose rings, then there wouldn't be an issue. And like I said before, doing this with 2 players just really devolves the experience since you both have to be on sync perfectly with each other. So nobody really won out here. That being said, the 2013 and Origins Retro Engine version improves this by making the whole thing true 3D, making it way easier to react to oncoming hazards, and Tails' response speeds are way faster, making him less of a liability. You may wonder why I even bother, since last time there was no real reward for collecting the emeralds, but this time, back in the normal game now with all 7 Chaos Emeralds, we'll be inches away from running into the first boss. We got a surprise for him. Go back left and get 50 rings and then come back. Eggman shows up with one of his most iconic weapons, the Egg Drillster. Just a car with a front-mounted drill. It's a cakewalk, but let's mess with him. By simply jumping or following the command or whatever Retro Engine version you have, Sonic transforms to Super Sonic. It's clear the developers had trouble giving the Chaos Emeralds purpose in Sonic 1. That's why in Sonic 1 on Genesis, they just made some flowers show up. It's clear that the developers wanted to give a gameplay reason to collect them, but couldn't come up with anything in time. Around the same time the first game was reaching the end of development, a very important chapter of a well-known manga was released. On March 15th of 1991, Goku first transformed into a Super Saiyan in the pages of the Dragon Ball manga. An instant cultural phenomenon in Japan. The form had Goku's hair go from black to blonde and stick right up and gave its user an extremely drastic power boost. It clearly had an impact on the Japanese half of STI, so the reward for collecting the emeralds became a homage to the popular manga. Besides appearing extremely similar to the source material, for the cost of a ring per second, Super Sonic has an extra high jump, as well as permanent speed shoes and invincibility. This can make Super Sonic a little bit unwieldy, something that directly led to the UK Sonic the Comic to portray Super Sonic as a Mr. Hyde type murderous psychopath. I hope you enjoy the reward, because in the Genesis version, his presence can be a double-edged sword. Since you can trigger him with just a jump, that can cause a lot of accidental transformations, and a well-known glitch can lock the game up if you happen to transform at the end of the level. Honestly though, Super Sonic is pretty rad. Not that Robotnik here agrees, as we smash his shiny new toy and follow him into the next zone. This is the Sonic 2 zone. This has got to be the most iconic stage in the entire game, and it changed very little mechanically from even the earliest builds, only really changing in layout and originally having a pink key to the background, corners cut in loops, and a Badnik I'll let Rudy handle.
Surprisingly for a zone so huge, the Badnik variety is kind of small, in that there are only 2 enemies. The first one is the Grabber, a big old spider that catches you like one of those claw crane games and then self-detonates, which seems like a waste of resources to me, not to mention the fact that you can just wiggle out. The second one is the Spiny, which just chucks tiny basketballs at you and hopes you start to dribble and dunk. Unfortunately, the basketball is made of plasma and Sonic cannot grab it under any circumstances. A shame really. Sonic B-Ball would have made for a better special stage. There are also 2 unused Badniks for this stage, namely the Bubbler and the Bubbler's mother. Apparently Big Mama was going to throw bubblers when Sonic approached, and they would explode in a matter of seconds. Imagine being a mother and loading your kids into a bazooka to get some punk-ass Hedgehog off the lawn. Priorities!
This zone pushes the blast processing to the very limit, even if it does mean getting stuck in a few walls in the Genesis version. The most infamous section has got to be these moving blocks of the water-like substance of Mega Mac, extremely similar to the pink water from Scrap Brain Act 3 from the first game, just without air bubbles. This has been more than one new player's trap, but the zone has many memorable loops, tubes to shoot you long distance fast. The zone's just wonderful. The egg poison is slow and you'll likely kill it before it takes up the toxins it's sucking up and drops it on you. The only way you're really gonna die here is with the false platforms each side that'll drop you to your death. It's happened to all of us at least once. After this though, it's on to second game in a row to have a major developed factory right next to the ancient ruins of a former civilization. Of course, that's because Chemical Plant was intended to be Zone 10, but it's pretty fascinating. Another thing I gotta add right here at the beginning is that the zone was called Neo Green Hill Zone for a good chunk of time. I got no idea why, since Neo usually means new. Did they mean it sarcastically? That name was eventually reused for Sonic Advance 1's first zone, where it fits much better. The Aquatic Ruin Zone is very much a blend of the Marble Zone and the Labyrinth Zone, but in a good way. The zone's still fast, even with water. This time though, if you're good enough, you can avoid ever stepping into it, but it won't be easy with traps like arrows waiting to spear our blue boy, and of course some pretty treacherous badniks.
It's really funny to me that the devs did not even try to hide that Aquatic Ruin is just a swamp. I love that one of the enemies is just some stupid ass fly. It's called a Wisp, but I don't think they knew it was a sign of things to come. We also got Chop Chops, who remind me of Jaws from Sonic 1, but who are way meaner looking. I do love the metallic blue on those guys. I feel like it's this zone that really makes you understand the difference between Sonic 1 and Sonic 2's badniks. Really, there's no better example than the Grounder, who graciously took some time off of AOSTH to come to star in a bit role in some 1992 indie game no one's ever heard of. Compared to their grandpas, the Burrobots, they're definitely less toy-like and a little uglier, but they're by no means unappealing. The red finish is fantastic and the track treads make a lot of sense for a zone with such an uneven terrain.
The boss this time around is Egg Hammer, who causes two giant totems to appear from underground containing Sonic and Tails between them, and uses a giant hammer to strike the top of either pole to shoot an arrow at us. In the Genesis version, you can use those arrows to climb up to the top and deal Robotnik a really quick defeat. But, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the switch to widescreen wasn't always a good thing. In the Retro Engine version, because of the new extra screen space, the poles are further apart, meaning Eggman is a little harder to reach, and the quick method doesn't work as well as it did before. Still, not a terribly hard fight, and we're on to only explanation I have for a place like this being here is that Eggman is funding his ridiculous Death Star ripoff by taking advantage of small animals' gambling debt, like Cucky over here. Remember kids, don't be a cuck. Anyhow, this zone changed the most drastically in development, going from a pink card aesthetic to the final game's appearance, which I do prefer. While I prefer the overall themes of Spring Yard or Collision Chaos, as this stage is less zone and more pinball tech demo, there's charm. That being said, we got a whole total of one new badnik, so I'll let Rudy tell you all about Crawl.
Yup, Casino Night only has crawls. It would seem like the Crawls family wanted to go on vacation to Las Vegas, but they took a wrong turn, and now Natalie Crawl is getting into a fight with her husband, John Crawl, and is threatening divorce in front of little Carol and Jimmy. I'd be pissed too if I had to walk that slowly to get anywhere. But really, being completely invulnerable in my front area seems like a dream. I'd love the shield too. Too bad about the exposed back.
A-Claw. Does anybody actually use the pinball flippers to fight him? I always just use the sides to gain momentum and hit him. Honestly, this zone is mostly flash and less substance. That's okay, honestly. It's a breather zone, and it makes me happy. What doesn't make me happy is... This has been a long time coming. Now, there's lots of people who hate the Labyrinth Zone. I totally get it. There are people out there that really hate Sandopolis. That makes sense. A lot of the zones in the Master System and Game Gear titles are designed about as well as this chunk of level designed in... Wait a second, this is also Hilltop Zone! Wait a second, who designed this? Oh wait, I have the design documents right here for you all. What you're seeing right now is the Hilltop Zone design documents. This is my all-time most hated zone. It's functional, but it's so bare bones with very few original ideas. The graphics are lifted partially from Emerald Hill, but just with altered colors. The only thing totally new to this zone is the crappy earthquake effect, which just doesn't seem like it's working properly. It's a zone that's just here, and there were so many great ideas for zones in Sonic 2's development that could have used the time and development this got. It makes me resent it. I don't care how little effort this took compared to the others or what. It's lame that it got here in the first place. It's a remnant of an idea that was only briefly considered, making this zone the past version of Emerald Hill. But it should have been shelved at the same time the time travel mechanic was, so the Wood Zone or Sand Shower Zone, or the big one, made the cut. The Egg Scorcher Mark II is a joke. You can kill it before it even attacks you.
Hilsnor Zone has the Orbinaut's distant fiery brother, the Gola, or the Soul, depending on who you ask. Sometimes you may find them laying around in the seesaws, fire turned off, just trying to catch a break, and there goes Sonic, making them bounce from one end to the other of the seesaw. What a prick!
Don't fall!
Rexors are also really cool. I'm a sucker for purples, and the dinosaur aesthetic is really nice. Plus, even after they've been blown up, their body still serves as a platform. Hooray for dinosaurs! And then there's the Spiker. It's basically a spider with a metallic, spiky rocket-equipped dunce hat, which it fires off when Sonic is in proximity. And then it's just completely harmless? Come on, Ivo, you were on a roll here! I do like the angry look on its face. It's like a child pouting.
Moving on. After that, I probably shouldn't use any adjectives I want to use here. The Zone. Mystic Cave is a fun reminder of how when Sonic 2 is at its best, the zones are charming and fun to blast through. Deep within the mines of West Side Island, we find a pretty spooky seeming zone with plenty of traps and hazards, especially spikes, with lots of puzzle solving with switches and vines. Not that that's a bad thing.
Who lurks in the dark, damp caves below? The amazing floating light bulb bug does. Okay, it's called a flasher, but my name is way better because it's much harder to misinterpret. Imagine things floating above you called flashers. I would not be okay with that. They just hang out and emit a small energy force field. They're chill, but their invulnerability makes them real jerks to hit sometimes. I can just hear their snide little comments about my unstylish, untrendy pants. Fuck off! Then there's the Crawltons, the little centipedes that just out of the wall and then just back in like a little cuckoo birdie. They're good at ambushing occasionally, but usually you can just break them in one swoop.
The Egg Digger is the boss of the zone, and is mostly just waiting for it, avoiding rocks it drops and pounding it a few times. Something I neglected to mention is the pit. An infamous hazard in Act 2 is this pit laced with spikes at the bottom that has held dozens of players hostage for decades. The reason is, at this point in the game, you're likely to have Supersonic, or at the very least, invincibility, since this game loves to give you invincibility in the stage for some reason. Since this isn't a bottomless pit, you'll have to wait, as you're stuck down here until it wears off. In fact, this questionable design choice seems like it was intentional, as early builds of the game made this hazard more and more obnoxious throughout development, instead of fixing what would normally seem to be a glaring oversight. However, and this is one of my most exciting Sonic 2 stories in my life, when the crappy emulation version of Sonic 2 on iOS was replaced by the Retro Engine remake, I read one thing on the Retro forums. Something to the effect of, be sure to check the pit. So on the bus that morning with my best friend, I raced through the game on my iPad to make sure I got to that pit before we got to school, and when I jumped down into it, I got to see. This is probably one of the most famous pieces of cut content in gaming that has ever occurred. On the same level as the Triforce Room in Ocarina of Time or Luigi in Super Mario 64. Hidden Palace Zone was one of the very first levels planned for Sonic the Hedgehog 2. One of the first worked on, showed up in dozens of magazines and early footage, yet didn't make it into the final release. The reason behind this seems to be that the zone just fell through the cracks. The team focused on finishing other elements of the game and didn't have time to finish the zone despite the work already done on it. In fact, it's said that if there was any more time in development, this zone would have made it. Honestly, it feels kinda bad. I always thought this zone looked so cool, but I'm sure it was a blow to the development team as well. So imagine my excitement as a 15-year-old nerd seeing this zone appear on his iPad as he raced through it for the first time. The first real official new classic Sonic stage in so long. It was redesigned for this new release, but the level design was great. I strongly feel like this zone is now a highlight of replaying Sonic 2 on the Origins collection. I enjoy it that much. Unfortunately, in the final Genesis release, all that's left accessible is this. With the cheat code, you can still access Hidden Palace Zone, but the level graphics are all gone and very little remains.
21 years in the making, Hidden Palace comes out swinging with 4, count 'em, 4 new Badnik types. First off, the Reds. They're basically motobugs with fire breath, but since they're dinosaurs, they're automatically cuter. Holy cow, they're adorable. I wanna kiss them on their little snouts. I will adopt a pack and raise them in my house. Speaking of dinos, there's the Stegway. He's basically just a motobug with the ability to charge, but more awesome because, again, dinosaurs. Significantly less awesome are the 2 remaining Badnik types. The Badbots are simple Bat-type enemies who like to swoop down to try and smack you in the eye, and the Jelly Knights are jellyfish-styled grabbers basically. Boring!
Brass Eggman is also now one of the hardest bosses in the game, with it kind of being similar to Hydro City, Hydrocity, however you want to say its boss in Sonic 3 now that I think about it, but it's way harder and it takes a lot longer. Supersonic trivializes it, but what doesn't Supersonic trivialize? This is the most zones I've ever had to cover at once. How did they launch this game without a save function originally? Like, it's so...
And now it's time to play Is JARTY Wrong? Just so you know, all of that was wrong.
What the hell is this?
Now, question 1. JARTY criticized Hilltop Zone. Is he wrong?
How can an opinion be...
Hang on, I love game shows. He's wrong!
You were correct! Sonic 2 is perfect and flawless, therefore his opinion is wrong. Now, for question 2.
Hang on, Prower. I know Sonic 2 is your favorite game of all time, and I'm not attacking you by criticizing it. I love all the Genesis era Sonic games. Just because one of them happens to be an 8 out of 10 instead...
8 out of 10? I'll get you, and I'll make it look like...
Believe it or not, an American designed the stage. It's a shock, right? Next thing you'll know, I'll tell you the sky is blue, or that humans breathe air, or the oil ocean zone is just kind of that. A giant ocean of oil that Robotnik is clearly using to harvest for all his machines. It's like a Republican's wet dream. The oil affects Sonic and Tails similar to quicksand in something like a Mario game. Sinking is obviously bad, but jumping can keep you from death.
Oil Ocean sure has weird-ass enemies. First there are these cute little octopi fellas, the Octis, who jump up and shoot a laser out their mouth like a Dragon Ball villain. Unlike a Dragon Ball villain, however, those Octis are unable to dodge a firm bump to the head. Then there's the Aquis who, okay, they float around, they hack up oil and then they spit it at you, like llamas. Like roomy old men. I'm just going to move on.
Other than that, we have oil slides, giant orb-shaped cannons, I think they're cannons at least, that shoot us to the next part of the track. There's also the fans that, just like Starlight Zone, will push Sonic back until they stop spinning, and my favorite, the push-operated springs that push us up loops. In the early builds of Sonic 2, there are also buttons that created small checker balls that roll for a bit, and that's it. No idea what they were used for, but it's very similar to the also cut Green Hill checker balls that once filled that zone before release. Another thing to notice is that in the prototypes, this zone is actually using the Casino Night 2-player music. I have no idea why, but if you listen to the original demo track of Oil Ocean Zone, it sounds like it was designed for a desert. Oh, for the love of Hilltop, could nothing about you be new and unique? This is a souped up version of the Hilltop Zone boss, with lasers instead of a flamethrower, and a few extra attacks. You defeat this thing the exact same way we did the other though, it just takes a little longer. Honestly, I've never found Oil Ocean terribly memorable or fun to explore, but it's harmless. The next zone up though. Alright, here it is. The zone that has everything going for it at first. The color choice is really cool, and the music track is really good. In this take of the scrap brain zone trope, we have a huge mechanical fortress with pistons that can shoot Sonic up, screws that Sonic can run on to ascend, conveyor belts, and lava among many more traps. To really explain why I dislike the zone, I need Rudy to explain the zone's badness.
Ever since I was born, I knew I had to talk about the three horsemen of the Metropocalypse. The unholy trinity. The bad, the worse, and the fugly. The Asterons is what ninjas wish they were. I don't know about you, but I never seem to be able to spot the little fuckers when I play. I can dodge like 60% of them, but it really stings when they hit. Fuckers. The shell crackers are like customized crab meats with one huge claw. I'm assuming it's the crab equivalent of when someone's arm is really big because they jacked up too much. The N muscle really shows too because they can just punch you from a distance and make you fall down a hole. I guess excessive masturbation gives you improved limb control? The slicers are those angry little dudes who just want to ruin your day. They chuck their homing spinny blades at you and you just take it. They're in the worst place ever too. At least you can have sweet, juicy revenge because they're defenseless after they've fired their projectile. Eggman really should have used those guys exclusively throughout the journey.
To add on to what Rudy said, these badniks are placed in the most obnoxious places possible. The Astrons are mostly okay, they're the lesser of the evils. Shellcracker has a ridiculously stupid hitbox and Splicer. Everybody knows how shitty these things are. And this zone uses its badniks in such bad ways, it's ridiculous. It's like Baby's first level design all over this place. You want to know what the biggest kick in the balls is? Do you want to know? Imagine being a kid again, struggling with the game. You know, because you're stupid and your brain isn't fully developed. You get to the end of Act 2, and you're shocked. No boss? Huh? And then it drops. Metropolis, Act 3. Metropolis, Act 3. What is up with these games and giving the worst zone in the game an extra freaking level? I know. Metropolis Act 3 was leftover design from a scrap level called Cyber City, or Genocide City Zone. You know, before the Japanese staff understood what genocide meant. They felt it was a shame to cut the level and incorporated it in as Metropolis Act 3. Oh, but you cut that! What were your guys' priorities? Oh, we're gonna cut the purple cavernous area that fills people with awe and wonder, but we'll keep the freaking palette swap of the obnoxious badnik stage. Listen, Metropolis gets me mad because everybody is quick to criticize Labyrinth Zone. But I don't remember the part of Labyrinth where I'm sprung out and immediately hit by a splicer I had no chance to avoid. The zone has some great ideas, but it clearly needed more time and balancing, and the badnik places are just obnoxious. They're just being in Act 3 is just the final nail in the coffin. Egg Bouncer is just obnoxious too. It's not hard thanks to the power of invincibility frames. Hitting Eggman will cause one of those orbs to become an Eggman dummy you have to break before you continue fighting him. Avoiding the orbs though is easier said than done, so all I can say is good luck. This boss was brought back for Sonic 3, but there the double spin attack breaks him in seconds. What do I even say here? From now on, the last few levels are just one-act stages, but what do I even talk about with this? It's a small playable cutscene where you run on the tornado's wing to move it around while you avoid enemies. Although you'll more than likely die from getting bored and trying to spin dash, which the plane can't keep up with and you'll likely die. I'll let Rudy explain the badniks and we can just move on.
Sky Chase Zone goes on for way too long, but at least the badniks are nice. I love the turtloids. It's like the mom turtloid is taking the baby turtloid for a ride. It's also really funny because sometimes I misread the sprites and it looks like the baby turtloid has a walker, like an old person. The Valkyries are basically unmanned kamikaze planes. Their only plan of attack is to ram into Sonic, which actually, yeah, if you had a decently solid, really fast plane, you could probably kill your target by ramming into it. The Nebulas kind of look like chubby monkeys with helicopter blades on their heads. They also poop projectiles from their butt. Kind of horrible. Truly, Eggman's genius has found the ultimate humiliation for Sonic.
Known as Sky Fortress Zone in the Sensor prototype, a build so late in development, it probably almost shipped with that name. Immediately, Tails is shot down. He lives, don't worry. And Sonic barely jumps and lands on the ship as Tails attempts a crash landing. This level would probably test your platforming skills, but hey, this immediate and probably intentional shortcut is just so inviting. Anyhow, Rudy, tell us about the badniks.
Oh, I gotta do this quick, I fucking hate the music here. Oh, there's only one enemy type. Lucky for me, looks like Sharps the Parakeet changed his name to Clucker and Species to Chicken and went to work for Eggman. 1992 was a bad year for him, man. That said, the fact that the Cluckers shoot eggs is really funny. They're just sleeping in the turrets, they hear the clanking of Sonic's feet on the steel, they wake up panicking and they just start blasting. Word of advice. You're gonna want to give these guys your candy at Halloween, otherwise your house will be full of yolk in the next 30 minutes.
Getting to the front, Sonic falls into a trap set by the Doctor, the laser prison. 3 deadly objects try to skewer Sonic as a laser beam moves from left to right to hit our hero. Of course, when it's not firing, you can hit back, or you can use Supersonic to trivialize this. Anyhow, Eggman escapes, getting to his spaceship to take himself to the Death Egg, but luckily, Tails managed to get the tornado flying again with a booster, and Sonic manages to grab a hold of Eggman's ship, and we finally enter the final frontier. No more rings in most versions of the game, and all that are left are 2 bosses. The first, I'm gonna let Rudy cover, since Robot Sonics are kind of his thing.
You love to see it, a really good Sonic robot with true, honest to god, good mecha design. You don't really get to see all the detail in the pixel art, but even then his frame really leaves an impression. You know, the bulky grey body, the classic Zaku mono eye, the wheels on its legs, the buzzsaw mohawk. Obviously, the official concept art has much more detail. I really like the springs on the back and the backpack thrusters. Also, with high-res art, it's much easier to tell that Mecha Sonic is kind of meant to be a Mecha Godzilla reference. Obviously, the color and the bulky frame with the steel plates were already kind of a giveaway, but the MS insignia on his arms is the one that seals the deal, as Mechagodzilla also has a logo on his arms. Very cool robot, not as good as Metal Sonic, but I'm really glad that this is how we got started, if you don't count Roller in Sonic 1.
Of course, I've done all this before. This is a cakewalk. Mecha Sonic cannot compare to the real deal, but that was clearly a distraction. Eggman runs away, and I know this is a common meme, the oh look, Eggman's faster than Sonic thing. But to be honest, I always figured that Sonic was being cocky about it. He does the same thing in Unleashed after all. Of course, what Eggman is really doing is getting to his ultimate weapon. Death Egg Robot is rather intimidating. One wrong move and you'll be dead, since those spiked hands are no joke, but they are guarding the one weak point. On our side though, the thing is extremely predictable. It goes through one phase of slowly walking towards Sonic, stops, you hit it once or twice before it flies away, it homes in on you, you stand in the corner until it's locked on, you spin dash to the other side, it shoots its hands at you, and you follow the second one back to hit him before he flies away. It goes back to the walking phase, and after 12 hits, it's all over. Sonic races away from the exploding Death Egg and takes a leap. As it goes to white, I think it's a perfect time to go back and talk about development builds a little bit. I respect your opinion too, buddy.
CD-loving maniac.
The earliest known build of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that we have access to is known as the Nick Arcade build. It was bought by DRX and other community members for $1,500 in 2006. It's speculated this was the version of the game shown at the 1992 Tokyo Game Show and in issues of Sega Visions, but it's probably best well known for appearing in game show Nick Arcade. Child actress Melissa Joan Hart, best known today for her time on Sabrina the Teenage Witch in the 90s, appeared for a cross-promotion episode of her at the time time, current Nickelodeon sitcom Clarissa Explains It All with her co-star Jason Zimbler. It was one of the very first people in the world to get to play Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
And she sucks so badly at it!
I've seen this clip a dozen times and it never gets easier to sit through.
Come on, guys. She never played the game before. Don't you think you're being a little rough on her?
Just keep watching.
Well, no, okay, I've seen worse. Oh, now she's... Oh, come on. Oh my god, are you serious? Have you ever touched a controller in your life? You press the buttons to do things. It's easy.
Back the hell up! That's not nearly enough room!
Are you kidding me? Ugh, I see why she's stuck to acting.
Clarissa, explain why you're so bad at life.
Sabrina, that teenage bitch!
Anyhow, I'm not going to repeat the differences I already covered in Zones. What I will add as far as changes in this specific build are, for starters, the lack of any new music from Sonic 2. This build is clearly a ROM hack of Sonic 1, to the point that Green Hill is still in the ROM. It's an extremely messed up version of Green Hill, ported to Sonic 2's different aspect ratio, but it was only done halfway. All the zone names are also the same as Sonic 1's. So Green Hill is Green Hill, Marble Zone is Chemical Plant, Spring Yard is Hidden Palace Zone, Labyrinth is actually nothing, Starlight Zone is Emerald Hill, and finally Scrap Brain and Final Zone are Hilltop Zone. The biggest change to Sonic and Tails, though, is, of course, Sonic's completely different walking and running animations. Likely cut down for the final game for performance reasons, Sonic actually has more frames of animation in this build than the final game. Another fun thing is if Sonic touches a wall at a high speed, he flies back and lands on his butt. Thankfully, it only happens in this build.
The programmer who suggested that was fired. From a cannon!
I find this build infinitely fascinating because this is probably the earliest build of Sonic 2 that we will ever see. At this point, it's almost just a ROM hack of Sonic 1 that's being held together by tape and glue. Of the 6 zones in this demo, only 3 of them made it into the final game, those being Emerald Hill, Chemical Plant, and Hilltop. But each of these are in an extremely primitive state where they may look like the final versions, but all have huge radical changes in their designs and mechanics. The Summon Y build is next in the development timeline, and it's named that as the quote-unquote first Sonic 2 prototype that has been released on the internet. See, according to Yuji Naka, this build was stolen from a New York toy show in 1992, and made its way onto pirate and copy devices in parts of Asia, where a man named Simon Y discovered it and made it more well known in 1999. As such, it's one of the earliest prototype discoveries ever made. Y disappeared to follow other interests in 2006, and I always kind of wonder whatever happened to him. Anyhow, this build happens to be further along than the Nick Arcade build, and is already getting closer to the final game, but we still have a long way to go before this game could be considered finished. For starters, it looks like pirates messed with the ROM to hide the Sega logo on startup. They did a pretty bad job at it, as it's still pretty easy to find it. In this build, we can find a lot more zones than we had access to last time. Notably, another cut zone, the Wood Zone. There's not too much to this treetop stage, likely why it got the axe. Axe, trees, yeah. But I have to say, I really like the graphics here. And then we have Genocide City Zone.
Genocide City Zone? What? You mean Detroit?
It's the most well-known what zone name in history, but it's completely empty. It was later just recycled in a Metropolis, so the name is really the only interesting part of it. Death Egg also is completely empty at this point, and the special stages definitely don't exist. But a palette for Supersonic actually does exist at this point, meaning the plans for Supersonic were already in place. The third build, known as an alpha, was dated August 21st of 1992. It's extremely similar to the Y build, but it implements the final Sonic sprites as well as being the first build that implements a proper Supersonic. There's still no special stage, of course. Everything is getting closer to release, but the biggest change unique to this build is a slightly different invincibility track. Take a listen. This is also the second and only known build to use the original Casino Night graphics. Other than that, not a whole lot to say here. The September 14th pre-beta is next. It and the last build were both released by Hidden Palace, that's the group and not the Long Lost Zone, during Sonic Month in 2019, and is a pretty significant step up in the process. For one, we actually have options on the title screen. Not actually options, but we have the 2-player mode on the title screen. it's a start. We also have some early basic title cards for each zone, which is neat to see, especially finally getting to see that glitched Neo Green Hill title card from all those magazine pictures. Death Egg is also finally here, but both Mecha Sonic and the Death Egg robot are highly unfinished, to the point where you can't even hit the Death Egg robot. Unfortunately, at this point, the process to remove Hidden Palace from the game has already started. It's a shame. On the upside, the special stage is finally in the process of being implemented, but at this point it's almost a tech demo. It takes forever to load too, and it looks unlike any of the final game special stages, and it's very different feeling in terms of physics. This next one is actually a very interesting time capsule. See, it originally linked to the internet thanks to the Censor Group on November 9th of 1992. That's right, before the final game. It was forgotten about quickly as people back then didn't even care about an unfinished version of the game, they just wanted the final game. It took 27 years for it to be rediscovered once again in 2019. The build is getting closer and closer to the final game, the biggest difference is now being the special stages being mostly completely different and needing work. At this point, that just leaves betas 4 through 8. These were released with the Nick Arcade build in 2006, coming from a Sega in-house backup, and are the game as it reached the final weeks of development. We start to see things like the final game's title screen, last-second bug fixes, and so on. There's lots to talk about here at this point, so I'm not going to waste time explaining every other less interesting detail.
And JARTY is exhausted.
I'm not done yet. We still have the zones that never made it in any build we have for Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Okay, so as I mentioned before, early on there were plans for a time travel mechanic that got cut from the game early on. A bunch of zones were brought up in this stage of development, like Ocean Wind, Rock World, Blue Lake, and Tropical Plant. All were likely cut extremely early in development. We have very little information about them as well, but concept art does exist for other zones, Tropical Sun, Emerald Isle, and a stage called Madness Mountain, which is speculated to be originally from the medieval period that the concept art hints at existing. The others are probably slight renames of other stages. I don't see Blue Lake and Blue Ocean being unrelated to each other, for instance. The Dust Hill Zone is interesting. Now we know it was an early name for Mystic Cave Zone, but for years, and I mean years, it was attached to this mock-up of a desert stage we now know as Sand Shower. This zone never made it into a build as far as we know, and was intended to have its graphics reused for a winter-themed stage, although nothing is known to exist in that version.
Sonic 2 is probably one of the first video games I ever played. It might be Sonic 1, I don't know, memory's kind of fuzzy. I was pretty young when we got our Genesis for Christmas. But it's definitely one of my favorite video games out there. Super Sonic was a game changer for the series and is iconic. Heavily inspired by the Super Saiyan, obviously considering the time it came out. It probably has my favorite soundtrack of the series, if not maybe CD. And yeah, it's really good. The only parts I don't like are the last level, Sky Fortress Zone, or I think it's called, and I don't really care for the final boss stretch, because I don't really like the whole, like, zero rings, fight two bosses, you get hit once, you get beat up. But yeah, Sonic 2, it's very good. Probably my third favorite in the series, maybe? I don't know, I haven't really given it too much thought. I should one day. Probably the one I casually played the most, though, because Sonic 3, can't play that casually unless you have a complete save file.
Sonic 2 and I have a love or hate relationship. I admire his dedication to go beyond what the previous installment has done with its amount of content and concepts. You have 8 zones to go through, if you discount the other 3, which are just one-act structures. However, while it does seem fun in paper, the execution, didn't go as well as they hoped. For one thing, the pacing completely changes in the later half of what was once a high-speed platforming experience. Zone structures are more disorganized, enemy placements are misbalanced, acts would either go too long or too short, and Death Egg Zone. Hard times, bro. But looking into the development of the project, it's very clear as to why the game turned out as it did. Yuji Naka, based on what I've read, is a very strict man who is very reluctant on keeping how Oshima envisioned Sonic as a whole. When you task an experienced strict Japanese developer, with an attitude of course, to lead a group of Western newcomer devs to create the biggest Sonic project at the time with a more different vision in mind. There is going to be a lot of conflict, especially with the conceptual stages of development. If I were to describe Sonic 2, it's that it's the game created by a team that clashed too hard with their own vision of Sonic, that there had to be a lot of compromises in order to get the game out in time.
Sonic the Hedgehog 2 may be my favorite of the classics. Even better than Sonic 3 and Knuckles, maybe. I mean, nothing wrong with it, but Sonic 2, I don't know, there's something about it that just feels, it's more simple and somehow more complex. I can't describe it well, but hear me out, please. I think my first time playing Sonic 2 was on this legendary system called the Xbox. I know, prehistoric times, can't even have Uno on it, but yeah, I remember playing it for the first time. It wasn't my first Sonic game, I'm embarrassed to say, but that was Sonic Riders. Good game, it's just weird that it's my first Sonic game, But Sonic 2, I remember my eyes lit up. Like, I looked like the Iron Giant, my eyes blinking red. It was amazing. And you know what, I applaud Sonic Team for... Actually, I didn't think about that line, but I applaud them for making a good game, I guess? Shrug? Who knows? But yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, it means a lot to me. If I think I'd put it up there, it's probably like the top 3 3D platformers ever.
I meant to say 2D platformers, sorry.
Come on. You see those levels? Come on. Come on, man. Come on. Anyways, thanks for listening to me ramble about Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Thanks, Blue, for letting me be in your video. Now let's go. Mamma mia, here we go. Wahoo!
When it comes to my memories of Sonic 2, it really all does come down to Sonic Tuesday. I was old enough to have strong memories about it. I knew about it well in advance, and everybody that was high school aged or older was aware of it. It was in magazines, it was on TV, you could not escape it. And the idea that everywhere in the world, everybody would be able to buy the same game at the same time really was unheard of at the time. Of course now, it's not. It's common. But at the time, it was just unbelievable that we knew the day that a game was coming. We could go and get it, and we could bring it home, and we knew that everyone around the world was doing the same thing, enjoying the game that we had. The game itself, when you put that in for the first time, yeah, it was impressive, but when you started out on Emerald Hill, it was kind of the same as Sonic 1, and the way that the series seems to have gone, the first zone is kind of like a warm-up. When you finish that, and you get to the second one, you get to Chemical Plant Zone, and that music hits, and the stage is completely different, bright colors, and super fast moving, and it is just like, wow, okay, the game has officially started. It was just fun from beginning to end. And on a final note, I did have a Super Nintendo and a Genesis and a TurboGrafx. Something I did at the time, I put all three together and I put the best game that I had in each one, and I just kind of looked at it like, I cannot believe that we have these 16-bit machines and these 16-bit games that are so far advanced from what we started out with when I had an Atari 10 years before. And it was just one of those moments where you just kind of take stock of everything. And that's pretty much everything that flashes by when I think about Sonic 2.
It isn't perfect by any means, but it is truly one of my most favorite games, as you all have come to know. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the video game, has really helped me through some pretty rough times, as dumb as that may sound. There would be nights I would spend in my room just playing Sonic 2 over and over again, just because I had nothing else to do, and whether that was a good thing or bad thing, I would say it's changed me as a whole and a person. My appreciation for video games and just sprite work in general all originates from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Without that game in my life, I would not be the same man I am today, the furry F-boy that we have all come to know and love. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is truly one of my favorite games, and I couldn't imagine life without it.
This is not my favorite of the original classic Sonic games. In fact, I think I prefer 1, 3, CD, and Mania over this one. It has pacing problems and questionable design choices that clearly came from the rushed development timeline. If this game could have been everything the developers wanted it to be, I'm certain I'd be singing another tune. That doesn't mean I don't love this game though. This game is just as important to me as the other 4 classic games, and at the end of the day, it may be the most important game in the series besides the original. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is everything it needed to be. It expanded on what worked in the first game, added some improvements, but that's something a lot of games do. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was something different instantly. The first Sonic may have opened doors for Sega in the North American gaming industry. After all, it was the genesis of an icon. The icon Sega needed at that time to compete with a highly anticipated successor to Nintendo's juggernaut. But this game changed the industry. For the first time in recorded history, a worldwide launch was attempted for a video game, changing how the entire industry looked at releases. There was some marketing for a game before release, sure, but Sonic 2 was pushed everywhere. You couldn't escape it. Parents couldn't. Nintendo couldn't. It may have been brief, but Sega briefly outdid Nintendo in the North American industry. On top of that, the game was not developed solely in Japan, but was designed in the United States in a time where this is what you'd expect from a US developed game from the Genesis or the Super NES. So many industry greats touched this game. Without the man who designed the PS4 and PS5, Mark Cerny, Sonic 2 would have been drastically different without the lead programmer from the first game. Craig Stitt later went on to help form Insomniac's biggest hits for PlayStation. And how many 1992 video games do you know had their entire ending theme be the basis of a hit band's lead track on a new album? Sonic 2 changed so many things about the industry, despite being rushed out and held together by tape. I think it's easy to forget that now, but Sega broke all kinds of ground with its sequel. It was the genesis of a revolution. There. Are you happy now? I did the Sonic 2 video. It only took months of time, and I nearly killed myself trying to get it done.
You did well. I could have done without all the ridiculous slander of the best game of all time. But it was good.
Anyhow, there's something missing.
Did you miss me?
Oh, right.
Man, did you get stuck in a bathroom or something? The video's nearly done.
Oh, just planning my big scheme to, fix all of humanity.
How very fascist of you.
And I have help.
Hey look! It's the dumb guy from the Toon Dudes intro.
Okay. What's the scheme this time? I'm not surprised whatsoever by this.
We are going to purify the world by making everyone, and I mean everyone, obsessed with the greatest show ever made, making everyone just like us.
Scary thought.
You mean Family Guy?
What? No. The greatest adult animated cartoon of all time.
South Park?
Before South Park. Before Family Guy.
What's going on?
Prower's a goof, but he may have just stumbled on a way to save the planet. Just follow me.
Okay, so before Family Guy, before South Park, but after the Flintstones and after the Jetsons.
Danny Elfman did the famous theme song.
I didn't know that the Family Guy theme was done by Danny Elfman.
It's not Family Guy!
Oh, I get it. So before South Park, but after the Flintstones and the Jetsons.
Yes!
Wait till your father gets home.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Hey guys, wanna go watch The Simpsons?